Hello, everybody. Welcome to the last Humanities Institute event of the academic year. Our theme has been a broader history of thought, as you saw on the screen, and we're glad you all could join us. Just a quick reminder of the format for today. We will have our speakers speak for a while, and then that'll be followed by a question answer session. Some student panelists will be able to ask a question just by unmuting and speaking. Everyone who's attending in the audience, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and time permitting, I can ask the question on your behalf. And now I have the pleasure of introducing our speaker today. Femi Táíwò is Professor of African Political Thought and Chair of the Africana Studies and Research Center at Cornell University. His research interests include philosophy of law, social and political philosophy, Marxism, and African and Africana philosophy. He is author of Legal Naturalism, a Marxist theory of law, Africa Must Be Modern, a manifesto, and How Colonialism Preempted Modernity in Africa, which was a winner of the Frantz Fanon Book Award of the Caribbean Philosophical Association in 2015. His writings have been translated into a lot of languages: French, Italian, German, and Portuguese. And he has held academic positions in Canada, Nigeria, Germany, South Korea, and Jamaica. It's especially fitting to host Professor Táíwò today at our final event of the year, because his work has at times expressed perfectly what we have been trying to do this year, and what we have been trying to explore this year, quote, the oneness of the human experience in spite of the diverse ways of being human. Please welcome our speaker, Professor Táíwò.
Oh, thank you. I want to set a timer so that I can get reminded when I'm about to run out of time. Okay. The title of my talk is Omoluabi, Doing Ethics in the Key of Yorùbá. I would like to begin by expressing my gratitude to the Scripps College Institute for the Humanities and its director, Professor Yuval Avnor, who originally extended the invitation to me to contribute to this distinguished series. Rebecca Ackley and the rest of the administrative staff and the technical staff, for the better part of today, deserve a special gratitude for, as do their counterparts at my home institution, making this happen as flawlessly as it is. To the faculty and especially the students who have read some of my materials sent ahead as part of this conversation, I offer my deepest appreciation to you. I hope the irrecoverable time you have expended on those pieces has not been a waste, minimally speaking. Certainly, I would hope that you have been rewarded by them, even if only marginally. To all of you, my audience this evening from at least 2 continents, possibly 3, who have honored me with your time and presence, I will do my best to ensure it is not a waste. As much as possible, in what follows, I try to fit my reflection into the theme of this series, a broader history of thought. No, my lecture was not prompted by your theme. It emanates from my teaching. More about that presently. and my ongoing concern to enter into the global dialogue of ideas occurring in my primary cultural inheritance, Yorùbá. I take it that when you asked me to help expand, make broader the history of thought, you wanted me to share with you something unsampled, and which, if sampled, exhibits some aspects of it that may not have been apprehended. And if apprehended, the significance of which may have eluded us till now. This, from my experience with how this request is often understood by and large, by both those who wish to be illuminated and those to whom the appeal is directed, makes this a very fraught request. In light of what I just said, and away from how some might meet your request, I would like to caution that this presentation, my lecture today, is best construed as an invitation. Please mark the word. And definitely not a donation to you, my audience. In formulating my topic in light of your theme, I could have announced it as a lecture in Yorùbá ethics. Given my experience of having speaker and audience alike process this as a gift, often an exotic one, offering something that is either what the audience is unfamiliar with or unlike what is the standard frame of reference, in the present case, the Euro-American imagination. I'm sorry to say that my lecture today harbors no such aspiration. Perhaps illusion is a better description. Given what I know of Yorùbá civilization through its more than 1,000 years of existence, the many variants of ethical injunctions, practices, and others to be found in it at any given time, the very dynamism that characterizes it, and the inevitable proclivity of all major civilizations for hybridization, it would be a fool's errand to pretend to offer you, quote unquote, what the Yorùbá think when it comes to ethics. I prefer instead to take a strand in general philosophical thought, specifically ethics, the perennial question of how we ought to be in the world, of what it is to be a good person, and see how this is articulated, understood, and ultimately resolved in Yorùbá discourse when it comes to such matters. In what follows, I dilate on what the concept or term Omoluabi means, its genealogy, and why it deserves our attention. At the end, what we recommend it to you will not be its genealogy, its Yorùbáness. Rather, what should matter will be, as a philosophical idea, as an ethical injunction, how it does or fails to enrich our understanding of that of which it treats. If it does, its being Yorùbá will be less significant than its illuminating our understanding of the human condition and its applicability to climes beyond that in which it has originated. For that reason, I will implore you not to leave here today and tell others that I have given you, hence donation, the Yorùbá concept of whatever it is that I'm talking about. Rather, I am presenting to you and asking you to think with me, hence invitation, the idea that I'm presently going to share with you. See if it resonates with you, if it illuminates or obscures your understanding, if it helps you to see the intersection, Yorùbá iterations of being human and that which is native to you. Beneath it all, undergirding my work and thinking, is the firm belief that humanity is one, and that our many syntaxes in the variegated ways in which they have emerged in human history are all, when all is said and done, idioms of a single language that I like to call humanese, just the language of the human. Now, to begin with, Omoluabi has no translation in English. It has no direct English equivalent. When I try to capture it under the rubric of a good person, I am approximating. Yes, There are discussions in English, but each and every one of the translations are attempts with different degrees of adequacy and clarity at capturing what in the original Yorùbá it is supposed to reference. And there are two sources for this work. The first is a paper that I teach in my Introduction to African Philosophy class on a regular basis. It's by a British anthropologist who was also a colonial official in Nigeria. And it's titled Mutumi Nkiriki, the concept of the good man in Hausa. To be described as Kiriki in Hausa is the ultimate moral accolade that can be bestowed on a person. I am suggesting that in Yorùbá, Omoluabi is a close relation. If you are Yorùbá, especially those Yorùbá in the audience tonight, even if you are not a scholar, but you pay attention to everyday discourse and usages in the culture, you know, especially at the present time, that the term is trendy and trending. A state in Western Nigeria designates itself the state of Omoluabi. That its alias. Another state in the same area uses it to describe its aspiration and as a standard for determining the moral worth of its policies. A Yorùbá management consultant who lives in the UK wrote a book in 2012 titled Omoluabi 2.0, a code of transformation in 21st century Nigeria. So that's what I mean by, it's trendy and trending, so it's all over the place. Timothy A. Awoniyi has placed the concept at the base, quote, of the principles of Yorùbá education. The goal of this education is to make an individual an Omoluabi. To be an Omoluabi is to be of good character in all its ramifications. Good character in the Yorùbá sense includes, and please pay attention, includes respect for old age, loyalty to one's parents and local traditions, honesty in all public and private dealings, devotion to duty, readiness to assist the needy and the infirm, sympathy, sociability, courage, and itching desire for work, and many other desirable qualities, end of quote. That is Awoniyi's characterization of Omoluabi. So let us use this first approximation as a place marker for now. What is obvious from this description is that the idea is redolent with ethical possibilities. It is against this background that I would like to introduce an example of the kind of ethical conundrums that are present in ethical formulations in Yorùbá that are, at the same time, universally presented in any but the most primitive human social formations. Let me now offer this audience an excerpt from one of the materials that you all read for me in preparation for this occasion. Devotion to duty is one of the attributes identified in the quote from Awoniyi just now. And in the piece titled From Fagunwa to Akiwawa that you read, from me, I actually used the example of a novel from Fagunwa, one of the most popular novels, in Yorùbá literature. And I talked about these people who had been selected to go on a quest to find the secret of better organization for their society. And one of them was a guy named Kako. As at the time that they were setting out for this expedition, he was newly married. And during the departure, his young and new wife said, "No, you can't leave me like that, we just got together, so you got to stay." And he said, "I got my duty to perform." And ultimately, as you read, right in that text, because the wife would not let go of him, he lost his head, drew his sword, and beheaded her right there. There are many ethical and social philosophical issues raised by this scene, There's the problem of the place of women in that society and what seems like a cavalier inferiorization of their women. There's the issue of the author's views on women and their attached merits or lack thereof, the stubbornness of the newlywed wife and her insistence that her husband owes her time together, especially given how recent their union was, Now, here are some of the questions. Is she wrong to think that his preference for joining the expedition might be perceived as a reflection of her inadequacies as a wife, and for that reason, deserving of condemnation by all? Is it right to think that duty to country trumped any filial obligations towards his wife and the rest of his family? And even if we grant that last point, does that justify killing the wife as a corrective for her unreasoning and unreasonable insistence that he stay with her? So what I'm trying to say is duties often conflict. And that is part of what makes them prime candidates for philosophical analysis and discussion. So here is one solid reason for not proclaiming Yorùbá ethics merely as an ethnographic fact. My Yorùbá audience know too well the approbation enjoyed by the 7 brave questors in Fagunwa's imaginary world. More importantly, to the extent that he was channeling values inherent in his Yorùbá heritage, Kako could not have been a stranger to their sentiments. And we find similar examples throughout Yorùbá history. Could we regard Kako as an Omoluabi? Remember, one of the attributes of an Omoluabi is devotion to duty. And it was as a part of his devotion to duty that he killed his young wife so he could go discharge, his duty. I would hate to think that a culture that over time will not permit hunting for sport, and for the most part, things have changed and things are changing. But in Yorùbá culture, you eat what you kill, or you use what you kill. So there was no killing for sport. That will not permit hunting for sport when it comes to other animals will be lackadaisical towards a man killing his wife in order to discharge a duty to his community. Yes, such killings are permitted, but often they are ritualized in some way to keep the focus on the sanctity of human life. This means, and one would be right to expect, that opinions will be divided on the moral status of Kako's behavior. This allows us to complicate the picture, take seriously the heterogeneity that mark any advanced civilization, and dig deep into how the thinkers of such a society, when called upon, might justify his behavior or condemn it, as the case may be. When they do this, as Cranton Diop reminds us, they have moved into the sphere of philosophizing. So it is time to philosophize on the idea of Omoluabi. Let me check my time. Okay. First, what are we to understand by it? It is a noun, but it is also used as an adjective. In a different context, it is used as a metric for judging behavior or how an individual presents himself. Believe it or not, people who look at me as I've presented myself today and so on and so forth, and who don't know the devil behind the vestment, will think I've presented myself in an Omoluabi way, So that's the kind of thing I mean by presentation, self-presentation. In a different context, it offers us a metric for judging behavior by an individual, but it also offers something to aspire to for individuals as they conduct themselves in the world. When people proclaim, I would like to be regarded or to become an Omoluabi. That's what I mean by that. In all these different deployments, I do not know of any single instance where the idea is associated with anything undesirable, bad, untoward, and the like. What this means is that anything pertaining to Omoluabi is by definition good, desirable, to be visited with approbation, to be recommended for embrace, and so on. But Omoluabi is not a simple word that cannot be further decomposed. It is, in fact, a composite word. More appropriately, it is a sentence contracted into a term. The sentence is Omoluabi, literally an entity born of, for the moment, Lua. Okay? The problem is that, contrary to most existing interpretations, none of the components lends itself to a single meaning, such that we might say that there is a straightforward translation of the word into English. So let me now give you some idea of the complexity that I just mentioned. Omo in that word is usually translated as child. But Omo in Yorùbá has other meanings. Omo is also what you call an apprentice. Omo is also what you call the digits of the fingers, of the hand. Omo is what you call an inferior, in a social situation. And Omo is what you use when you want to create a diminutive of anything, in the language. So now, when people routinely then translate it as Omo, it gives an impression that does not actually present to the hearer the complexity, of what we're saying. 2, the root of the word is Iwa. So that's why I played the music that you heard in the opening. That music is a theme album by that maestro of that genre. And the title of the album is Iwa. And it is an extended dilation on Iwa. Now, Iwa is routinely translated by many scholars of Yorùbá as character. And that's correct. But the original root of Iwa is the verb wa, to be. So Iwa is actually, originally, being. So between those two, which one of them is relevant to Omoluabi? Everybody thinks it's character. That's true. But once you permit yourself to take seriously being, and you begin to explore what the connection is between being and character, and I'll come to that at the end, towards the end, when I tell you my composite characterization of Omoluabi, you're going to see the role that being, plays in that. But Lua is not a word in Yorùbá. It has no reference. So what people then do is to say Lua actually refers to Olúwa. Olúwa is the name for Lord or God. So you catching my drift? So Omoluabi then becomes, a child that was born by the Lord. And you can say that, and then you can begin to explore how all those connect to, but it all depends on what Lord you are talking about. Okay? But Olúwa is also used as a kind of contraction of two words, Olu and Iwa. That is the Lord of character. So that's where they then say that Omoluabi is the child begotten or the Lord of character. And if you are the Lord of character, that means you are an embodiment of everything good, when it comes to character. And whoever then can be traced to you will, of course, be a part, an image, of that embodiment, in their lives. But I think that things are not that simple. And the reason why I say that is that Oluwa is one word, Oluwa is another word, but in recent times, with the development of Yorùbá grammar, and new words being introduced and all that, A new word has now been entered into the orthography called Olúwa. Olúwa is now the Yorùbá equivalent of subject in subject and predicate. So Olúwa is the subject of a sentence, of an action. So if you now substitute that for Omoluabi, you find a whole new kettle of questions, that you can raise. And I'm going to be paying more attention to that, as introduced. So I've already talked about, Omo. Now, you talk about B, and everybody says B is to give birth to. But B is also, in Yorùbá, used to generate, procure, engender, and those are not all related to birth. So again, if you now want to use B as Omoluabi, that is born in that sense of gestation and birth and so on and so forth, then you have to show why that is the most adequate interpretation, to deploy. Meanwhile, Olu, that people say is Lord, in original Yorùbá religion, Olu actually used to be the name of one of the gods in the pantheon, whose name you could not call. In those days, it was the god of smallpox. So you had to keep looking for euphemisms because you don't want to draw the wrath. So in other work that I'm doing, I'm actually trying to show people that when Christianity got to Yorùbá land and they were translating the Bible and so on and so forth, the man who headed that mission, a Yorùbá himself, the only example in Africa where the Bible was translated under the direction of an indigene, in the language. I am sure he was looking for that equivalent in Yorùbá that would capture the wrath of God, that the Old Testament talks about. So that you don't toy with the name of that God. So there are other names in the Bible in Yorùbá for God. But everybody now thinks that Olúwa was chosen because that's the one that shows the majesty of God. They always forget the wrathfulness, of God, at the same time. So that you are looking for something that will literally fill people with dread, when you call that name, and all that. So that's another dimension, that I, want to bring this. So I have now given you the various parts. I've now given you the complexity that attaches to them and why it will not be too wise to just jump, So let's now continue. Yorùbá are enjoined to become good persons. They are urged to strive to become Omoluabi and to see to it that their conduct is deserving of the adjective Omoluabi. Just as in Hausa, the goal of individuals is to be described as Mutumin Kiriki, I think who will object when I assert that the noun Omoluabi is the Yorùbá equivalent of the good person. I say the good person because nothing in the term denotes or connotes, gender. So it's not a good man. It may be so in the Hausa version, but in Yorùbá, it's not gendered. For this reason, we must reject any gendered reading of the idea. Although I have said that it can also be deployed as an adjective, we know that, that is not the only way, to understand it. So what I now want to share with you is my interpretation of Omoluabi. And I want you, that's why I said, so don't take this and say Femi Táíwò has given to you the Yorùbá idea. This is Femi Táíwò's reading of something he finds in Yorùbá, trying to come to grips with ethical conundrums that are present there. So that's what I mean by doing ethics in the key of Yorùbá. So the emphasis is not on the Yorùbá, the emphasis is on the ethics. And in doing it in Yorùbá, we actually open out to the rest of the world to say, does this address your concerns? Is this something you can use? Is this something you want to argue with? We can do comparisons, and so on and so forth. So what I am suggesting is that Omoluabi is actually an emanation from, Oluiwa. And Oluiwa, in this case, I really want to use the new term for subject as the appropriate one, rather than a lord, rather than some religious, and all that. And when, I put it that way, that leads us to the suggestion that the entity referred to emanates from Oluiwa. This is where it matters whether we interpret it as being or as character. Olu here is best understood as master or chief, the best of something, and the like, not a god, not the Lord. Oluiwa would then be the chief instance of that general type of Iwa that we are looking at. Whether it is being or character, Oluiwa will be the fullness of either and the best instantiation of its type. In either case, there is an assumption here that Iwa is dynamic, not inert. And the product of the expression or manifestation or unfolding of Iwa, because behavior in Yorùbá is Ihuwa, see? Behavior towards. So when you behave, you are actually manifesting, opening up your being, So I am saying the product of the expression or manifestation or unfolding of Iwa towards its most accomplished form is Omoluabi. The issue that emerges from the fullness of being / character. And it is this unfolding of being through conduct or behavior that is emblematic of the fullness or the best of that being that we call character. So as we say in English, a swallow does not a summer make. And it is from the repeated doing of something that people conclude about what kind of person you are. So they are not going to do that just on mere episodes. You have to keep consistently, and that then raises new questions that I'm going to. So who or what then is an Omoluabi? The tenets are varied. Many writers praise the idea, designate it as a salient marker of, let me read one to you in Yorùbá. I have a translation, but I will not give you the translation. I'm going to get through this in time. Some of the things that this particular person says about Omoluabi is that the Omoluabi, strives to address others with respect and honor. He or she needs no reminder of the place of proper regard for people, does not keep malice or harbor resentment against our associates, is ever ready to offer praise and encouragement, to people, does not say out loud something other than what is on her mind, is not duplicitous, is attentive to counsel of neighbors and other associates. Omoluabi will lend a helping hand to anyone in distress and help relieve, if not end, their suffering. The list I just read is convergent with what I've distilled from the literature concerning what Omoluabi is. Here is another example. It is said that Omoluabi is one, some, or all of the following. 1, does not overstep her bounds, does not indulge in eye service, does not behave in an inappropriate manner, is content with whatever he or she has, is infinitely patient, loves others as herself, has a gentle disposition, always has a good word on her lips, is not duplicitous, and is incapable of holding a grudge. Given that the various species may and often do conflict with one another within the same individual, not to talk of among different individuals, we need to know whether there's another norm by appeal to which such conflicts might be resolved. So for instance, how might we resolve the conflict of duties between Kako's husband duties and his patriotic, duty, okay? Secondly, given the plurality of Omoluabi tenets, we need to know whether there's a threshold combination of these tenets that someone has to attain to be called an Omoluabi. Is it the case that all the qualities must be found together all at once in an individual for her to be a true Omoluabi? And even when we shall have answered these questions concerning what permutations of qualities will ground the designation, we are still left with the question of determining the specific boundaries of the moral qualities themselves. Know how we usually ask, can we have too much of a good thing? And what is the provision in Yorùbá discourse for identifying, and bringing that to a close? In answering the preceding questions, what I have not referenced is the fact that it would be too much to assume that there's any convergence in the culture on what are the boundaries of each of these attributes. We may even have regional variations. We may have ethnic variations, within the culture. And of course, the culture continues to grow. So what was the case in the 19th century may no longer, obtain. And as scholars, we need to track, all those changes. In other words, philosophical discussion in Yorùbá would perforce revolve around making sense of these divergences, establishing the criteria for meeting these different injunctions, and controverting them towards firming up the boundaries of the discourse. This is where my caution at the beginning of my discussion about donation comes into clear relief. If the elements that make up Omoluabi are occasionally in conflict with one another and may not always be consistent, we should be dubious when one like me offers it as a done deal, something that you all can lay hold of and run with in your understanding of possible exemplars of how to be human in the Yorùbá setting. The lesson here is that, as in other philosophical traditions, doing ethics in the key of Yorùbá means that any announcement of Omoluabi as Yorùbá ethics must be met with skepticism, challenge even, designed to elicit some awareness of the complexity that I've just brought to your attention, and justification for embracing a particular configuration of the idea and not competing ones, whether the inconsistencies and tensions that were highlighted above deserve any attention, and so on. And this is my last paragraph. Does that mean that you all have to wait until Yorùbá scholars settle these issues in order for you to get involved with them? By no means. Rather, as I indicated at the beginning, this is an invitation to you to get involved. Of course, for you to get involved, you must be willing to do what people like me have had to do to get involved in the business of controverting the relationship between Moralität and Sittlichkeit, between Loa and Tua, the first German, the second French, in registers that I was not born into. In other words, I am asking you to be suspicious of gifts. I have tried in this presentation to give you an idea of what it would be like to do ethics in Yorùbá, rather than give you a Yorùbá ethics already constituted. This I have done without even bringing up the question of the historicity of the idea, its evolution, and the many ways in which its principal elements have changed over time in the life of the culture. I can only hope that you will accept the invitation and engage in the business of procuring a broader history of thought. Thank you for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Despite all the muted mics, I'm sure there's a lot of clapping. I'd like to open up first to the students. If any of the students have a question or comment. Hannah, go ahead.
Thank you so much for your speech. I really enjoyed it. In one of the pieces we read in preparation for your speech, and you also touched on this in your speech, you emphasized the value of literature in studying philosophy. And this is something that I and many of us were interested in. So I was wondering if you could elaborate on the role of literature in philosophy at all?
Is that literature has something to offer philosophy. Writers mine their traditions for characters, for plot lines, for narrative strategies, and so on and so forth. And in so doing, they give us incredible accounts of how to be human in the world. So my attitude is that, and the broader pedagogical issue that drives my teaching, I tell my students, I want to train them to find philosophy anywhere and everywhere. So I tell them, when you're on the bus platform, keep your ears to the ground. You get a lot of stories that can actually enrich your philosophical consciousness. So for me to be able to model that for them, especially in my introductory classes, I always try to teach a literary text and then get them to ask questions of that literary text as part of their training. So, and what led me to this in my own work is that when I was in graduate school, a dear friend of mine asked me to come and talk about Things Fall Apart to her class at my university. And that was the first time it became very clear to me that people were doing damage to that text, and they continue to do so. Because people read that text all over the world as a novel of encounter, such that it was when white people got there that everything fell apart. But when you look at that text, the part where white people got to in the place is less than 1/3 of the length of the novel. Meanwhile, the crisis in the society had begun after Ikemefuna was killed. So from that time, I kept saying, someday I will write this paper. I did not write that paper until very, very late, until 1999. And what I did was to look at Things Fall Apart and Wole Soyinka's Death at the King's Horseman and see the philosophy of history that the two writers were trying to get across to us. So I mind the literature for philosophy of history, for accounts of how change comes about in human society. And then when I was doing my work in philosophy of law and all that, because I was defending natural law, I actually used Sophocles' Antigone, as one of my texts, to look at. So that's, and I really encourage, and I teach classes on philosophy, freshman seminars that I dedicate to philosophy and art. So, so my students would read stuff on rock music, they will read stuff on jazz, on comedy, they will read, Crane's Badge of Courage, so, and they are very good anthologies, that do that, but that's a long answer to your short question. Does that make sense?
It does. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Hey, is there another student question before moving on to the audience questions? Anyone?
Hey, I convinced you. What's wrong with you?
I think they're pondering the invitation.
You see, that's what I do, because I'll just take it that, oh yeah, I got, you know better than that.
We'll come back to this.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Let me read you, we have plenty of audience questions as well.
Yes.
First question, thank you for this original invitation. Are there ways to think of Omoluabi relationally, that is, to think of its generative potential for comparison, given that Yorùbá exists in relation to others within and beyond its particular location?
Absolutely. In fact, that's why I confess that the original inspiration for this was an equivalent paper on Hausa, okay? And because, again, I'm never afraid of falling on my face, when it comes to my teaching. If I can read it in English, I'll put it before my students. So, I would teach classes with, selections from Confucian classics, from the Upanishads, and so on and so forth. And then that's how I begin to see how, this is my story. Human beings are put on earth to do one thing, and that's mess up. So the only thing that's different is the languages in which we mess up. And once you do that, you can actually take this idea and then think of the respect for elders and how that plays in Confucian classics.
Mm-hmm.
And are there issues around that in Confucianism whereby the criteria are the same? If you have reason to believe that your parents are no good fellows, do you continue to respect them? Are there provisions in the culture, in all those that you can appeal to and say, yes, you must respect your parents, but it comes with this caveat, that they will not repeatedly embarrass you, steal your money, or put their noses in your matters, especially family matters, or try to tell you who you should be, getting down with, these are all issues that occur, and we should not paper over them by just saying, oh, this is the culture, So when we now take Omoluabi and we take Confucianism, we can then begin to see where the convergences are and where the divergences are, and how those divergences actually educate us more in terms of how we can plug the holes in our own, by borrowing from others. Yes, I will encourage that where I do it. So,
thank you. I'd love to see the syllabus for the class you described. Nati, I think you have a question. Go ahead.
Yeah, I do. So one thing that really struck us when we were discussing your reading was the idea of transcendence in the afterlife.
Yes.
That you discussed. So I'm wondering how do you quantify? Are you able to sort of apply the idea of Omoluabi to the deceased, and if so, how?
Thank you. Good, very good question. This will interest you. There's one prayer I always utter when we get together here and everywhere else. When we have an event like this, I will always say, may you never throw a party that people don't come to. You are going to find a situation where if people decide that the deceased was a no good bastard, okay, their handling of funerary, observances for him or her will be profoundly affected. Whereas, if somebody is designated an Omoluabi, everybody wants to pay last respects to that person to show their appreciation of the exemplary life that they led, while they were still here. Does that answer your question?
I sort of have more questions on that.
Go ahead, please.
So are you positing that after that the ethics that you have in your life, the Omoluabi,
Yes.
that is carried into the afterlife?
Oh, I see.
Or is there a way, so because I know that the deceased are sort of, they transcend our sort of norms.
Yeah.
So does that continue after?
Thank you. One way that you can answer that question is the following. Because in the culture, there is belief in the afterlife. And then they make a distinction between good death and bad death. Now, if you die a good death, one of the consequences of that is that those you left behind want to keep you permanently as part of their lives as long as they have breath in them. And one of the ways in which they do that is when they have family gatherings, when they want to do anything and all that, they literally ask you not to fall asleep where you are now. They literally ask you to guide them in their deliberations so that they will not have too many missteps. Okay? Now, one part of that that I am reluctant to address is how we need to separate that from the Christian belief about Judgment Day, and who will be resurrected and so on and so forth. Not too many of us do enough care to separate those two now. I try. I don't always succeed. And I'm always asking us to not take things on the surface and then see whether what I've just described now is the kind of thing that Christianity endorses. I don't think it is. I don't think it is the kind of thing that Islam endorses. I don't think it is. But in Yorùbá religion, okay, you are never completely gone. And that is how the process of ancestor making is prosecuted. I always tell people when I was in my teenage years, the room that I used to use in my maternal grandfather's house was actually the grave of my great-grandmother, his mother. So I used to joke with my mother, please tell your great whatever it is not to show up tonight. I don't want to be disturbed. But because that's the reason why until Christianity came and then colonialism and all that, it was a battle royale to get people to stop burying their dead at home. So if you die a good death, you are buried at home because you continue to be part of the family. If you die a bad death, you are thrown away because they don't want you to find your way back to them. So that may also be part of, I hope, the question you are asking me.
Sorry, I don't want to take up too much airspace, but can you improve in the afterlife? So the people who have died a bad death, who are thrown in elsewhere, do they have the option to improve?
Thank you. I think I'm on very tentative grounds here, but I think that would be one of the differences between Yorùbá religion and let's say, some Eastern religions, Hinduism or Buddhism, and all that. Because from what I know, and don't take my word for this, so it's not something that I can definitively tell you, I'm sure of. Everything that can be done to wipe out the memory of a bad death is done. So that means that, they really don't want a situation, they don't think of a situation where that bad person could improve yonder, So they are always asking for the good departed not to take too long to show back up in the family. It's actually an invocation that is always made. And we do have names that reflect this. My only sister has a name that reflects that she's the reincarnation of my paternal grandmother. So.
Thank you. Let me go to another audience question now. This is a question from someone from your past, but not in the way that you were just discussing. Someone who knew you in Ibadan in the 1970s. The question is, it has to do with the evolution of ethics. Does the meaning of a virtue and change with time? And if so, how does this present?
This is really where And that's why I said I did not want to present you with a made up, and all that, because we have arguments, at least some in my circle and all that, about some of those virtues. One of those that I've written about and I've been most critical of is the whole business of extended family and the obligations that are imposed on successful members of families to be responsible, for all the others. And that's considered a virtue. That's the reason why the person said the Omoluabi must be generous, must be open-handed, must help people who are in trouble. So now you have people like us, and this is not new. This is not something coming from, quote unquote, the West and so on and so. Within the culture itself, there are standards that have to be met, such that at some point, when people decide that this person is just a spendthrift and there's nothing you can do and all that, people will start telling you, stop shelling your melon on the back of the calabash. That's the metaphor that they use. The only thing I can say is that many of us who are in philosophy, I think we've been dropping the ball because we never engage in these debates, and these are the debates that all of you can then join, when we make them available. But I'm afraid you have more statements of fact than interrogations. Does that make sense?
Thank you. Yes, I think it does. Should we go to another audience question?
Go ahead, please. I'm here.
Okay, this is a question about the Fagunwa story that you wrote about and that you discussed in the talk.
Yeah.
The story describes Kako's acts as, I'm going to try to say this correctly in Yorùbá, and you can correct my pronunciation if it's too bad. Iwa Aidara.
Yeah. Bad behavior. Yeah.
Most unbecoming behavior is the translation here.
Yes.
That is to say, Kako is not Omoluabi.
Thank you.
And I suppose the implication of this question is perhaps the novel answers some of the questions that you said that it raises. So it's an invitation perhaps to say more.
Right. No, but the reason why I put it in here, apart from the fact that you all read it and all that, is precisely to show that there are debates in the culture. There are standards, that are, controverted. Okay? And here's the interesting part. Yes, everybody thought that Kako, ought not to have killed his wife and so on and so forth, but it did not disqualify him from going on the expedition. What does that tell us about the society? It's not good that you kill your wife, but you are still one of our 7 heroes. That's the part I did not bring up. But since that has now been brought up, so that's the rejoinder.
Right. Okay. Thank you. A couple of quick questions. One, could you say more about means and ends in the context of Yorùbá ethics? And is there a hierarchy? And the second question is there a hierarchy of duties and accountabilities in Yorùbá ethics?
Thank you. My answer to the latter part of the question will be problematic. And this is why. If we were having the kinds of conversations that we ought to be having, then we will come up with usable, even if tentative conclusions about those hierarchies. Okay? That's not what we do. The second part of that, is that there are duties that pertain to position. There are duties that pertain to relationships. There are duties, that pertain to society, Now, I want Yorùbá ethics to begin to work on those things and then give us the metric in Yorùbá that we can deploy from the culture to help us determine which duty ought to supersede the other one. Okay? I'll give you an example. Since I do philosophy of law, and all that, that is what the judicial system is set up to do. It is to resolve the conflict of rights. And in resolving the conflict of rights, there are deeper philosophical resources within the culture where they would then say, this right is to be upheld at this time because that's the one of the two in conflict that is more consistent with the larger picture of who we are and how we expect to be in the world. As philosophers, I don't see us doing much of that or enough of it. That's, again, why I said I was going to present to you on doing Yorùbá doing ethics in the key of Yorùbá, rather than coming to tell you I'm doing Yorùbá ethics, where I just outline and give you, what are the duties, and all that. If the duties don't hang together, how do we resolve them? That's why I said, whatever answer I give to you will be problematic. I'm not sure that I'm even in a frame of mind to give you an illuminating answer, to that question. Not right now.
Thank you. Is there another student question? Should we go on to another audience question before we run out of time? Students? No. Okay. Another audience question then, and then we'll wrap up.
Yep.
One question is whether or not you are saying, and I suppose this is your latest answer notwithstanding, this question came up earlier. Are you saying that to some degree there is no such thing as a full Omoluabi? As a full Omoluabi, so full as in complete. Is it matters of degree that come into the concept?
I missed the first part of the question. I think
is this what you're saying? Is the concept of Omoluabi such that there is no such thing as a full one, that it is just a sort of relative concept?
Actually, I can be more daring in answering that question. Okay? If the sense of being a full Omoluabi can be had, it will not be based on the literature that is available right now. Let me go back and remind you. When we say that an Omoluabi has, behave in an inappropriate manner, for us to determine what are the boundaries of propriety, it's not a simple question, is it? And sometimes they are context dependent. Sometimes, they have to do with what the values, of the society are. And then I said, not behave in an inappropriate manner throughout his or her lifetime. For the most part of that lifetime, a third of the time. These are all issues that people don't litigate. And I'm saying these are the issues we should be litigating. I'll use a different example, that I used in another presentation 2 years ago. You say that the Omoluabi should not be duplicitous, think something and say something else. But the same culture tells you it's not every cloth that you dry in the sun. So what guidance do you offer people to know when to air their, whatever, and when to bite their tongues? Is it the case that it is never okay to bite your tongue? Then in that case, you should air everything in the sun. That's one of those contradictions that I talk about. And that is central to every culture. So part of what I'm saying is, don't let us present Yorùbá philosophy as if those conundrums are not coded into its DNA too. And let us get on with the business of trying to untangle them. I see you nodding.
Thank you.
No, make me feel like I'm making sense, right?
Yeah, yeah. I wasn't even trying to be kind. Maybe I'm effortlessly a good person. Yeah. I'd like to end with a question from a Scripps College professor, who I gather you know. The question is, if the gender of the characters in Fagunwa's tale had been reversed, that is, if the woman had killed her husband in the name of duty, would she have been considered an Omoluabi?
No. No. In fact, that's part of the complexity of the culture. My friend, has argued that, Yorùbá don't do gender, but we have disagreement about that. But it is correct that the language is, for the most part, non-gendered. So that's why when people translate Omoluabi as the good man in Yorùbá, they don't get it. It's the best you can do is the good person. The only thing I will say is that how some of the other elements, for instance, patience, love others as herself, has a gentle disposition. This is part of what I mean by the complexity. It's a culture where a gentle disposition is not always valid. Because there are times when you are not supposed to be gentle, and when having a gentle disposition represents an abandonment of a charge that you should lead. And then you now have all kinds of things that are gender-based, about how a woman is supposed to comport herself. And that will now introduce new wrinkles into how we understand Omoluabi. And there may even now be some kind of, gender infiltrations into how people understand, how a female Omoluabi is as opposed to a male Omoluabi. And again, we only know by studying it, by tracking it, and then asking questions, but this is not the way it's supposed to be. And if it has changed, is that a change we want to embrace, or is it a change we want to chuck? And what good reasons might we have for doing one rather than the other? But any kind of, because part of Kako's problem is that he's a very, very impatient person. And impatience is almost an original sin in the culture. So that's why infinite patience will be one of the qualities of an Omoluabi. So even if he had not killed his wife, it's an open question whether Kako, even as a person who is given over to impatience, would have been on the road to being an Omoluabi. That's the kind of thing that once you begin to isolate, all these, and then drill down to each one of them to ask, what does it mean? How might we think about it? Are there complexities attached to each one of them? Then it becomes very, very, very difficult to just talk about Omoluabi as almost a marker of Yorùbá identity.
Thank you. That strikes me as a perfect note to end our evening, and to an opportunity to thank you very much for your time this evening, for the discussion. Obviously, there's a lot more to do and to think about here, and I suppose that was the purpose, is to show us that. Thank you all for attending. We hope to see you next year, whatever the theme may be. We don't know. Thank you once again, Professor.
I want to also thank all of you for putting this together, for inviting me. And to the students, feel free to shoot me new questions that occur to you. That will not be a problem at all. I'll be glad to take your questions beyond the now and all that. And I really, really want to thank you for spending your time on some of the stuff that I shared with you, and for showing up this evening and asking me some very, very important questions. And as I said, this is pretty much work in progress. And I can tell you this is the first time I'm presenting this, so you got in on the ground floor. So you will be very important as I proceed, in terms of how you have forced me to think hard and close about some of these issues. And for that, I cannot thank you enough.
It's been our pleasure. Good night, everybody. Thanks, everyone.
Yep.
And have a great evening.
All the best to you.